Okay.
Sorry about that.
Okay. No, that's okay. What I wanted to say is we started out in a mainstream agency, and we found that wasn't working for us culturally over time. And a lot of it had to do with some cultural things that had to do with using a talking circle, like we were using a talking stick that was sacred to us, and also our circle process. We had a lot of trouble with people really embracing that idea. So the community decided that we should go out on our own. And while we were doing that, we were building up a curriculum that would work for us. And we found that using mainstream bystander approaches weren't really resonating in our community. I should say it took me 10 years to even get my community to go to a mainstream agency because of the incredible distrust that folks had. And that had a lot to do with children and potential fracturing of families, the whole residential boarding school legacy. And many communities of color have been talking about that now that we realize that a lot of these traumas are embedded in our DNA. So there's a huge distrust. And when we tried bystander approaches from a mediation organization in our area, everyone got trained and it just didn't work. So we said, well, what's wrong with this picture? So we decided that we would go back and look at what were the things in our community before the colonists came. So we took a decolonizing approach, and we began to do what would be called a literature review, looking at what was existent in terms of our values, our traditions, before the settlers came. And we found these focuses on the original instructions that were given to all Native peoples around how to walk in balance on the Earth Mother with reciprocal relationships. So as we approached that, we began to have a lot more buy-in and resonance in the community, and it made sense. People felt comfortable with it. So what I really want to highlight here is that communities themselves, like the Indigenous community that itself, and of which I'm a part, decided that we would build our own capacity to prevent violent responses, and that we would use a social justice lens that would provide an opportunity for us to build solutions, and that included, coming up with our own curriculum. And we found that the main capacity that we wanted to build was that of empathy. And to do that, you had to build up to it, because actually when you look at the way things are in the government, addressing the polarization that's occurring right now, you don't see a lot of room for people being able to listen to other people's point of view. So my favorite expression is that there are no sides in the circle. So we also included, through our work, beginning to visit people who were incarcerated and working with them around the entry plans, and that they could become like a force for peace if we had a restorative justice lens. So these are the 4 relational aspects of circle that is fundamental to our work with the Walking in Balance. And it can be used for everything. Like we formed our own 501c3 in 2014 after having started in a mainstream agency in 2006. So you see, it took us a while, 8 years, I guess, to decide to go out on our own, so that we could truly embrace the circle culturally. So everything we do, when we meet as a board of directors, when we meet as a staff, when we meet to do anything, we follow these basic rules that we introduce ourselves, we build trust with each other, we identify what we're going to work on, and then we seek solutions. And there's no shortcut to building trust in our curriculum. So I'm going to move, and the whole curriculum is based on the fairness and equality, cooperation and contribution, that every single person has something to contribute. And in a circle process, everybody speaks without being interrupted or judged. And we go around the circle. There's no one who is more important than another. So I'll go through that more as I go. And the whole point is about community accountability. Many of you may be familiar with this slide, it's based on not an accountability to an agency, which unfortunately sometimes I think occurs in mainstream organization, but the community accountability is all the people in the community have to feel like they're safe, that they're respected, that, you know, it's the community's responsibility to assure that there will be, that everyone is responsible for the harm that's being done on some level. If there's social injustice and we don't address it, then in some way we're complicit in providing the underpinning for abuse to occur. So we have to transform the political conditions that we live in. And that really was a big deal when we were looking at coming up with our own curriculum, which later on in the presentation I'll be able to get to. And the values and practices are about everyone having an equitable role to play, which is not how our structure is set up. From the moment that the land was taken, and when the structure got set in, when ownership of the land happened, everything changed. That taking of the land resulted in incredible racism and sexism, in that only white men could own land when the first land was taken. And it was a long time before anyone else could ever own any land here. And the taking of that land was supported by religious institutions through the Intertribal from Rome, from the Vatican, that said that if people were a savage, you could take their land. If they weren't Christian, you could take their land. And actually this has global implications for the taking of land elsewhere as well. But focusing on this country right now, it allowed for the taking of the land with a sanction from the government, and it was called the Doctrine of Discovery, that if you discovered these new lands and they weren't being held by Christians, then you could take it, and that the people were seen as less than human. So that community that decided that at that time, you could say that that community is accountable for all of the harm that has come from that. And to this day, you can apply it. And like in the setting up of that system, they put in, the colonization set into place that all women were seen as objectified. The land itself is objectified. This allowed for the taking of the, treating the environment like it was not a human being. And Indigenous culture, Mother Earth is a being. And, physicists and scientists have shown that it actually is the way Indigenous people see it. It's a whole being, so what you do in one place affects the whole. And so what we're saying, that the social attitudes and norms that came out of that structure allowed for the objectification and the violence to occur that we're dealing with today. Many people don't see the connection between the taking of the land and the objectification of women, but Native peoples really have no problem with that. And a lot of people, when you look at it deeper, you begin to see that the same language around the land is the same language for traumatizing, people, children and women. And actually in our community, men and women were, sexually assaulted. So we looked at all the intersections, and in the work that we do, we decided that focusing on children allowed for people to all come to work on taking our training on the Walking in Balance curriculum. And that was key, focusing on safety of children. And, we look at the poverty that we're all under, that these were all man-made in that same structure that got set in. Because if you can't own land, and then you're denied access to even learning how to read initially, and you have no vote and no say, then these things lead to poverty. And that leads you to be treated as an object to work for someone else. So we often talk about how the root cause of the violence, sexual assault, and all forms of violence are based on racism and sexism, but sometimes we just don't go far enough in looking at that. So when we look at all the intersections of poor health, there's a racist component to health. It's still going on, even when you look at who gets access and all the struggle there has been around, coming up with a single payer that would allow for everyone to have the same quality health care. And you look at the adverse childhood experiences, you also have to include that if you're a child whose people were treated badly, who were, incarcerated unfairly, who were enslaved or were put in residential boarding schools, those adverse childhood experiences are intense. And they still go on today when there's still, people being impacted and treated as though they were, we are second-class citizens. And so it's like this spiral of intersecting sources of systemic violence. And you can't talk about sexual assault without looking at all those intersections. So I hope and these are the components of our curriculum. And we find that they have to be done in order to build to that capacity for empathy that I mentioned earlier. Like when we talk about peace and justice, we actually talk about, the doctrine of discovery, and what true democracy is, and the environmental justice. When we look at the psychology of plants and animals as equal to the psychology of human beings, to walk in balance and to have reciprocal relations with everyone is critical in our curriculum. And we talk about it as that it's important to look at, the gender equity, the reproductive justice rights, and the plant and animal rights are all equal. Everything is the same. Human beings are not put on a pedestal above other things. We're not the top of the food chain. We couldn't exist without all these other things. Without everything that Mother Earth provides, we couldn't even survive. So let's see. I'm just hoping I'm not going too quickly here. But anyhow, so we start out with that analysis that takes into account many of the things I've already spoken about the earth and, the injustice to Mother Earth mirrors the injustice to all the people who live here. And to develop compassion, like the way, that's actually not the very first one we do after peace and justice, we do respect. So respect is in the second module, has to do with respect of all living things as equal to ourselves, and that we're all interdependent. And respect for children means respecting that their issues and their problems are as great as those of adults, and that their time, we talk about, how that when children are respected, their words mean something, they're entitled to share in major decisions that are made in a family so that they can voice their concerns. Like say, there's a big move coming, to have children say and have fully explained to them why a move is happening, whether it be for economic reasons, whether it be for safety reasons, or whatever the reason, that children really don't have power to decide those things, but they deserve a full explanation, and also room to share how they feel about what's going on, and as much as possible. And that, to be seen as a full and equal human being, like when children sit in a circle or young people sit in a circle with adults, in those moments when the circle is in force and we're going around having a circle, their voices are just as important as anyone else's. And this actually helps a lot in resolving a lot of conflict and a lot of, experiences that people have had with violence that they would be able to share. In a school situation, when people use circles instead of using disciplinary suspensions, the children in the circle get to show their full story. And then after respect, we go into talking about courage. And in talking about courage, we talk about being able to speak truthfully without, being attached to the outcome of that the truth is important. Like when we go around the circle, when you speak, it's like you were, talking, to the Creator, say. The Creator would know exactly what you're feeling and thinking, so there's no point in putting out a falsehood. We ask that people have that same kind of radical approach to truth and honesty. And in our culture, that's very hard to do, because when you bring into account money into the situation, then a lot of times, even at work, people can't be totally honest without fearing the loss of their job. So there are a lot of things that the structure set into place that would, cause us not to feel that we can easily be honest and respectful and courageous with each other around doing things without fear of losing our homes, our housing, losing our jobs or whatever. And, children know this, and so it's important to begin to talk about what would be a fair way of living in the world. And when we talk about generosity, we're really talking about a society that's based on giving, not on a money economy. We think that the money economy automatically sets in a sense of violence and unequal distribution and unequal access to wealth, because through money you create the scarcity, and through money you can say that some people are worth more than others. And oftentimes when you look at money, value is assessed, and therefore people have less of a voice. And one of the things we found with our Walking in Balance curriculum and bringing it into housing and urban development communities is that when the Federal Housing Authority is in play, then actually when people have, if the police are called, people lose their homes. If there's an arrest, people lose their homes. We're thinking that homes are a basic human right. Housing is a basic human right and should not be tied to that. It's not tied to that with any other housing situation in America, only under Federal Housing Authority. Do you lose your housing? Even if your children get into a fight, you lose your housing. When you lose your housing, you're likely to lose your children. And all of this means that people are not comfortable about making reports around sexual violence or any other kind of violence, because they stand to lose their housing and stand to lose their children. So the whole thing around mandated reporting is something that needs to be looked at, because it's not having a public safety impact that anyone envisioned when they put that into place. And also on the reservation, they have the same thing with the Federal Housing Authority. The rules and regulations also mean that if somebody is caught with drug violation or domestic violence or any kind of violence, sexual assault violation, and it gets reported to the police and arrests are made, this means that people lose their housing, they lose their homes, they lose, their children, and it has major implications. So I'm thinking this thing with the Federal Housing Authority and their rules needs to be kind of looked at as actually causing more harm in communities than good. And also, Visioning B.E.A.R, as part of the Just Beginnings Collaborative, and through that work with other survivors around the country, we've all kind of been looking at mandated reporting as the unintended harm it's been causing. So Walking in Balance in our curriculum, we really address this in a really big way. And we're looking to make the community have other ways. Like if you bring the Walking Balance, curriculum right into the community itself can take charge of the whole curriculum, work out conflict resolution inside the community. And this training allows people to be really skilled, not only in sexual violence, domestic violence, and all forms of violence, drug abuse, and all the intersections that go into keeping people safe in the community. You begin to empower the community itself to have circles in the community. I'll explain more about that later. So all these modules build on themselves. But like I said, the empathy model has to wait until we do peace and justice, we do courage, respect, the balance module, and we have to also do humility before we can get to, and compassion before we can get to empathy. What we found that in the empathy module, that when we work with providers, and the whole group is all providers, and working with survivors, it's very hard for people to embrace the idea of empathy because it's not about incarcerating people. It's about having people have an avenue for healing. So it's about restoring the community rather than taking a punitive action. And many people still embrace the idea of long-term incarceration as the safest route to go. Unfortunately, that's what I've been seeing, especially coming out of mainstream agencies working with survivors. And survivors have a hard time having empathy for those who harm, and people who have harm have a hard time having empathy for the people that they harm. And in Visioning B.E.A.R, we're finding that if you approach this from a point of view of being able to understand the fullness of how someone comes to be causing harm and go back to what they experience and look at the social justice lens, you begin to see that sometimes many people who have done harm have been harmed, and it's important to have a voice about that. And when people get seen as a full human being, not identified by the behavior that they've done, or not seen as the whole of their behavior, like instead of calling someone a predator, we say that someone has caused harm or somebody has violated or committed violent acts. But those are behaviors, that's not the whole person. The whole person may also do good things. And a lot of people who've been sexually assaulted by people they know, especially family members, could say, that it's not this all or nothing. This person is very often not completely harmful in every action that they do, that there's some love there, there's some, other actions that they do that actually make it harder to heal because it hurts more. So the whole point of view of the entire Walking in Balance thing is to look at reciprocity in all our relationships, to be able to put yourself in someone else's shoes, to be able to hold yourself accountable for times that you yourself have done harm to someone. It's very powerful in our circle when people look at ways in which they themselves have caused harm. And when and there's hardly anyone, and I would say there is none of us who has ever gone through life without causing harm to someone. Once you can see like the harm that you've caused and how you would have wanted to be treated in order to be able to come forward and make amends for any harm that you've caused, a certain set of circumstances need to exist. And we found that people need to be able to hear you fully and know fully, who you are as a human being. And when people feel loved and cared for, they will more able to be accountable for their behavior. And in all the work that I've done, I have found that people really wanted that. They wanted people to acknowledge the wrong that they'd done, and they wanted that behavior to change. And a lot of the children that I know have never wanted to see the whole family broken up over that. They end up feeling re-victimized. And actually, if you use the restorative approach in the court systems, then the person who was harmed wouldn't be relegated to the status of a witness to their own crime, because the way it works, it's always it's a crime against the state. So now the person who's been harmed is peripheralized and minimalized in that and put on the defensive, where most of all of the protections go towards the person who's caused harm. So we feel like this model that we've been using to try to address these things hasn't worked very well all this time. And for us in the Indigenous community, when we say, sacredness, prayer, and vision questing, we feel that a lot of the children, they haven't had the chance to have milestones acknowledged, undergoing a process where they could be acknowledged, like moon lodges for women, when they come to their reproductive cycles. Those kind of sacred ceremonies used to, give people a sense of respect around themselves, no matter what their gender identity is, to be able to have come into their own. So we don't have a lot of those kind of ceremonies, and so Visioning B.E.A.R seeks to have those, like vision quests for young people, moon lodges, and special lodges also for men around the new and the full moons, to kind of link you up with all that is. So I don't know. I think maybe I could. I'm going through all of this, and you might have a lot of questions to ask me later. But these ways are all built on the keys are reciprocity, the keys are social justice and equity, and the keys are justice for everything, for the environment, and a lot of the work that we do, that we teach that the plants, they have rights and they have feelings like human beings do. And many people have had those experiences that have taken our curriculum. They've changed how they are. They spend more time with their children. They look at self-care in a much more profound way. We've had some incredible changes in how people have changed, and our evaluation process really documents behavior change because we involve it in the circle itself. And let's see how to explain that. Every session of the Walking Balance curriculum begins with a question around reflecting on what has gone on between circles and in your life, what thoughts and ideas are you bringing to the circle on that given day. And that question, which is audio tape, has elicited a great deal of behavior change based on the curriculum that is like kind of accumulates over time, and it has a cumulative impact. And in that cumulative impact, more and more transformative change happens in how people treat each other. The example I would give for that is one of the women in housing and urban development community that we trained. With a woman that was part of our training, she had gotten evicted for violence in her community. Her child had been, attacked by another member of the community. So she went to that person's home and asked, them, if they have a problem with her child, why don't you come and talk to me? So the person spit at her, and in that spitting, she just lost it, and that they had, both of those people got into a physical fight. So, and the woman who did the spitting is the one who called the police. So once the police got involved, both of those people got, arrested, and then there were, charges, and then they were subject to eviction. So the eviction goes through the mediation process, and in that mediation process, it was they avoided being seen as being evicted by willingly agreeing to leave. And so this woman continued to take the training and finished it with us. And then there were other incidents that she encountered in the world that would have elicited, that she changed how she responded. For the most profound example I can give is she was at a bus stop, and then she ran into a man wearing a Confederate T-shirt, and she's an African-American woman, and she asked him, "Why are you wearing that shirt?" And he initially said to her, "You haven't earned the right to know the answer to that." And ordinarily, based on what the example I just gave you, that could have elicited a really angry response, which would have been understandable. Instead, she said she saw the whole circle, and she said, "No, really, I want to know what its meaning is to you and why you wear it." So he proceeded to tell her that he thought that his people were the first people here. It was like a white man thinking that he was the first here. And she could have gone off on that, but she didn't. She started to tell him what her experience and her family history here, and the two of them ended up in the conversation. And that conversation lasted for about a half an hour and ended when her bus came. And I just that was just an amazing thing, because it shows that some changes had to go in both of those people, listening to each other's stories and putting on hold for a minute, one's own judgment or view around it, just listening intently. Because when you take the training, that's what's asked of you, is that while you have the stick, no one can interrupt you, no one can judge you, and you have to wait until you get the talking stick to talk yourself. And the challenge is that you not be thinking about what you're going to say, while someone else is speaking. And so what happens sometimes when the stick gets to someone, they at first don't have something to say. I'm always excited about that, because that means they were really listening. So we just say, sit for a minute, and then you could either pass or you can speak. But it meant that they were really completely, fully listening. And that, like I said, that has resulted in some really profound changes. And also in some of the changes we notice is that the empathy people have for people who are doing harm, like in the HUD community, there was some compassion around the known drug dealers there, and the people taking the training came up with the idea that they would have a community meeting with the folks from the community who had just been trained facilitating the circle, having a circle with the community where they could identify how to resolve that problem, to identify what was going on, what people's concerns were about it, and did they want to, what approach did they want to take. And the empathy they showed had to do with, they knew who the drug dealers were. They understood that maybe they were doing that because they needed money for their families. They were also aware that that they didn't want the child or the children of the drug dealers to be impacted by being shunned by other people, so they wanted to deal with safe ways for their children to be able to continue to have friendships with these other children, which I thought was something that I have found that, in communities of color, that there is this profound empathy around how to deal with very complex issues, and they're not so quick to judge. And they were hoping that the persons who were doing the drug dealing would actually feel safe enough to come to a community meeting and talk about things. And they were hoping that they would be able to share with each other, ways for dealing with that in a compassionate way, to let people know that, that might be a short-term resolution, but in the long term, if you get caught, you're going to lose your housing and you're going to lose your children. Is that something that you really want to do? So let's see. I guess I'm at the end of here. I'm going to open it up for people to ask me questions, because I find it a little hard to not see people and to know, what you're thinking about all this. So if you, have some questions to ask, that would be great.
If folks have questions or comments, you can go ahead and put them into the chat box.
So while I'm waiting for some questions to come, I just want to say that this training is 26 hours long, and you can't get a certificate unless you take all of the sessions, and that it's meant to be a way of life that results in other actions being taken in your community. Like when Visioning B.E.A.R first started doing this, we had so many sexual assaults, so much sexual assault in our Indigenous gatherings that we wanted to have gatherings where we could use this curriculum as a protocol for resolving our troubles and conflicts in a circle process, and with the aim of restoring our community to wholeness. And so that was like the whole idea behind it. And it's worked out really, really well. I, brought this to the Washoe community in Eastern California, and I trained, a team of us went and trained some providers and Indigenous tribal leaders in how to bring this to the community. So now the whole Walking in Balance curriculum is going completely out into that community. And now the next community that we will be training is the Wind River community, where the Northern Arapaho and the Shoshone live. Oh, hi, Don. Hi, Donna. So it's nice to see some familiar names. This curriculum evolved out of a trial and error thing, because out of what was needed in our community, it didn't just happen. And we teach in the 4 directions. It's interesting because we wanted to not have like the facilitator be the person, like a hierarchy. So what we did is we have teachers in the 4 directions, and the conversation between the teachers, like there are people sitting between everyone. And this way, everyone's talking to each other, we find, and we get feedback about how peer-driven the whole thing is, and no one feels like that anyone is better than anyone else. And more around the evaluation is we audio tape that first question, and then we audio tape people's first introduction to the question. Like, say, each circle, which lasts 2 hours long, starts with a question about how does respect impact the safety of children in the community. And that's if you're dealing with a childhood sexual assault dynamic. You could change that question to say, how does respect factor into keeping elders safe in our community? So you can adapt this curriculum to a number of questions, and it will give you, and then the whole conversation will, the content will all be geared towards that population. So it's a very flexible curriculum that can be used in a number of ways. It could be used working with people with disabilities. It can be, used working with young people directly. Because right now we're about to train 8 youth in the housing and urban development community. And they will then train another 8 youth. And then what Visioning B.E.A.R will do is provide support and tech assistance. We also provide child care for all of our sessions. We provide transportation. We pay trainers $20 an hour for their prep and training time. We also pay people to take the training that are from the community. And that was really critical when we worked in a housing and urban development community, that we pay people $30 a session to take the training.
Strong, I just want to...
I see some questions there.
Yeah. I just want to read, when you answer, if we could read them out loud, because folks can't see each other's questions.
Oh, okay, that would be great.
Yeah. And I know there is a question of how someone can access the training.
Okay, all you have to do is ask us, and then we arrange to do it. It's good for any community, like working in the college community. You could train students, you could train, staff people at, that are there. that are working on sexual assault. Like we're going to be doing some work with Williams College and also Mount Holyoke College too in Massachusetts. So all you have to do is request it, and then we'll talk about what you're hoping in bringing it and the kinds of effectiveness you're looking for, and then when we bring it, we bring a team of 4 people, preferably. Sometimes we've gone with 3. Like when we went to Washoe, it was like a long trip by plane, and we were able to finance 3 people going, but that worked out well too. And then you can take the training. It's like a giveaway on our part. We have like a soft copyright. So like if you, like for instance, in our tribe, we go with certain local history. So when we go to the Washoe community and when we go to Wind River, people can put in their own local history, and in terms of that. And if another population that's not Native, we also teach non-Native people this. People can use still the local and the Indigenous history in their local area, because it highlights the injustice. The whole curriculum is Indigenous-based. But this Indigenous approach is resonating with multicultural communities, because everyone is looking for something to replace this violent structure that we live in. And it's really clear when you look at the world today how a lot of the problems have bubbled up that we've never dealt with. And it's kind of, in my mind, good that they're bubbling up because we know what they are. We know that the racism hasn't healed. We know that there are still the attitudes that resulted in some of the most horrendous human rights violations that still existent, and that it's good that it's bubbled up to the surface for us to see. We see that, that the discrimination against Jewish people continues on. We see that the LGBT community is still facing real problems, and it's bubbled up to the surface, and you can see how the structure has set that all in place. And so people are looking for another structure. And when they take this training, it's just people, just for example, we did a training with a group of people coming from Boston. 5 of the people come from Boston. We teach with only 8 people in a group because it's very deep and transformational, and the conversations need to go there. We can't have any more than that, because between those 8 and the 4 teachers, you have 12 people. So, and we find that you can't, we'd have to spend a whole day if we had more than that. It takes 2.5 hours really to do 12 people in the group. People get so bonded. We had 100% attendance with the folks driving in from Boston. And people don't want the group to end when it ends, so now we're going to have we're setting a circle in place for people to come at least every 2 months. All the people that we've trained can come to a circle, because people really miss it that much. And it's a way to keep touch with each other. So it allows for people to really make shifts in their lives in such deep ways that it has actually changed all of us that teach it. I'm not the same person today that I was when I first started teaching this, because it keeps making more connections for me and more intersections in a deeper way. Even looking at the word apartment, the language, English language, and the way it goes against community, the word apartment for rent or where you live. Really, does it have to be called an apartment? It certainly could be called something else. And, there's lots of words like that. So let's see. Someone asked that I'm an advocate, and I work with other advocates and college students, and I'd love to be able to bring this training to students. It would be really awesome to do that. And because then the community can then train itself. If you brought it to college students, it would be great to have some students take responsibility for and take the training, working with with supports at the school itself for the staff, And then it could be brought and carried on even after people graduate, and other people can take it, take it over that have also been trained. So there would be this continuity that could exist, and it could result in ongoing circles around addressing issues on the campus. What I love about the curriculum too is it teaches the value of using this as a leadership tool, that every voice, and it's a shared leadership model. And, like for instance, Visioning B.E.A.R, we have complete transparency between our board and our staff. Everyone gets paid the same no matter what they do for the organization. And so it's just, so there's no up and down on anything that we do. And when we have evaluation team meetings, we have these two professional evaluators. And we're lucky because we have Morgan J. Curtis from Harvard and Patrick Lemon from the Oregon. And he also is a member of the National Sexual Violence Resource Center Advisory Board. These two professional evaluators, when they meet, everyone who is training gets to sit in the evaluation team meeting if they want to. And we have at least 8 people always when we meet with our evaluators. And everybody does the evaluation team meeting in a circle, so even the evaluators have to wait for their turn to speak. And it's all geared towards getting us the most effective evaluation that we can get. So right now we're working with Michael Quinn Patton's model of principle-based evaluation, which is uses storytelling and process format. And we're working with that model. And we're at the process right now of coming up with 4 to 6 questions that will get at all of what we're doing, in addition to each session asking the question that leads to documented behavior change through people's own words. And then these other 4 to 6 questions will capture the cumulative impact. So that will actually make the evaluation tools really great, and they would be able to be used more easily in communities of color that use more storytelling or any storytelling format of evaluation. So we're hoping to really be having some groundbreaking information coming out of our evaluation process. So
and next week, I just wanted to plug Strong Oak that next week on Wednesday the 19th, Strong Oak will be doing a webinar specifically on culturally relevant evaluation and what they've learned from that process of evaluating this curricula, right?
Yes, and actually it's really other piece of the evaluation that I should say we have a curriculum development committee. Again, it's all the trainers who come to to edit the curriculum and make it better and better. But we're going to edit it every year or two to incorporate the wisdom of the community members who say these incredible things that we can document, and then we can include it in the curriculum. And then it kind of belongs like an oral tradition in modern times, because people will truly feel like this is their curriculum. They'll see their voices in it and their words in it. And so the wisdom of the community gets captured in the ongoing editing process. So, probably going to put it out in like a loose leaf kind of fashion where pages can be inserted and taken out. The other piece that's happening is we're developing children's stories to go along with the curriculum. Because oftentimes, a lot of stuff is passed on through children's stories. So it's sort of like from cradle to grave. We really want to incorporate all the values and tenets of this curriculum into people's lives. So
there's a question. Could you repeat the name of the creator of the principle-based evaluation?
Michael Quinn Patton, Patton.
And then I know some folks were asking about where they can sign up for the registration for the evaluation webinar next week. And so just heads up that I'm going to put that link into the chat question, and it will also be in the follow-up email that you all get after this webinar. And Strong Oak, there is a question about how is the program funded?
Okay, well, you're probably going to be impressed with this, but the first year that we really started doing this, when we first went out on our own, all of us worked with no money, just to say. And we all work just as hard as we do today now that we are funded. So our two main sources of funding are really the Just Beginnings Collaborative, and which has been an amazing funding source, through the Novo Foundation, and then we get Haymarket People's Fund, resources too, because our approach is anti-racist and we have a community organizing kind of approach. So that funding source is awesome because it covers our operating costs, and it's read up every single year. So we've been getting funding from them for, I guess it's 4 years now. And, we expect to continue to get funded from them, probably for, unless we got so wealthy that we would no longer apply for it. But in the meanwhile, right now the board of directors at Visioning B.E.A.R does not want to take state or federal monies for our work because we're afraid that there will be too much control over what we do and that it would go against the very principles upon which we operate. So as of right now, this is where we are at with our funding. And also all of the funds that I personally receive when I go out and do presentations across the country, all of that money comes into the Visioning B.E.A.R circle, as program service income for us. So, and I'm expecting that down the way, we might have some micro businesses we're about to get some land that we can be on and we have a lot of Indigenous involvement in our program, and we have a lot of elder teachers who come. So we're hoping to have a place where, that will be ongoing, almost like a whole place, where people can come and do traditional arts and grow food and be on this land and work it together, put a longhouse on it, and really use it as a hub for all of our ceremonies and teachings and all of these things. So that's how we started out, wanting to have that land, and we said we have to have a good protocol to underpin our gathering so that we can resolve anything that comes up. So you see how we're community-based, but actually everyone is in a community of some sort. Like I could see, this being adopted, like in a church group, say, because if something happens in that group, that's a tight-knit group of people who meet all the time. And if they have a way of dealing with stuff that comes up that's conflictual, and also a lot of times people who have committed harm, it's important for them to have like avenues of spirituality where they can reframe and have meaning in their lives and reconnect with people in a good way. So anyway, there's just endless possibilities, but mostly it's almost like changing one heart at a time in a very deep way. What's documented also in our curriculum is that people talk about this way past, the impact of the curriculum goes way past the ones who take it because they keep talking with everybody, their family members, other community members, so people, do that. And so it has a major impact, which is exactly what we want, is for it to result in shifting the culture in a pretty dramatic way. So, yeah, it's like, you have to start inside a heart, and then that has to, like the principle-based evaluation shows that when people make these decisions and create structures, they're doing it based on some principles they're going by. So if you want to show a change in their behavior is going to be, what they do and what they decide is a reflection of what's under there. So the thing is to get what's under there to shift in order to make some different systemic changes. So, yeah, I hope, let me see, I'm looking to see some more questions here.
There are a couple. Someone is asking if it's possible to receive individual training and certification, or if it's preferred to find a group who can commit to the training.
We offer trainings, and people are, welcome to take the trainings that we offer as an individual coming from someplace. So, if you work somewhere and then you wanted to take this training, you could. And then you would actually be certified to teach it. And, but again, you would need, we teach in fours, but you could get some other people from Visioning B.E.A.R to teach it with you somewhere. And then you could build a capacity in your own organizational group to also have a team. I'm excited because the Boston group, they'll be able to teach people in Boston. There's 8 trained people, and it takes 4 to train another group, and then there's 2 groups. So I'm hoping what happens there is that one group of 4 will bring it to a youth group, and another group of 4 will take it to an adult group, and that everybody, and then you keep building. You see how this is going? You just keep building.
Strong Oak, do you have any trainings coming up?
Yeah. I will be doing some after the first of the year. Yes. And there's some people who don't live that far from here could take it, and also there'll be a training in Connecticut as well.
So if you send that information to me, I'll send that out in the follow-up email to everyone who registered for this webinar. And then if in the survey, after this webinar, the evaluation, if folks want to indicate that they're interested in a training, it's good for us as ISCASA to know that, because if we're seeing a lot of interest, then we could, possibly work to try to come up with funding to bring some of those trainings around our area.
Yeah, and right now I do have some funding from Just Beginnings that I also can use. When I first went out to Washoe the first time, what we did is they paid for half, I paid for half. That's how that worked, because there was no funding. The second time I went, they paid for it because they had funding. But and also, what I've done, Visioning B.E.A.R has done is work to build capacity on reservations by going to the councils to support grant proposals that are going on there. And sometimes we can do collaborative grant proposal writing. So I'm going to encourage that too, for if anybody wants to propose getting funding for the training, that we could get a mutual grant for it, if we're talking different organizations. So that's another approach. One way or another, we get where we're going to go, right?
Strong, I do see we missed a question from Donna, who asked if the land you were talking about is in Western Massachusetts.
Yeah, either in Western or Central, it'll be in that area. So, so Donna, you and I are in the same building, right? Or are we? I think I'm not sure, really, because we're very close. I know Donna really well. Wait, it goes back to the early 2000s when I was at the Survivor Project, and Donna came with some incredible programming through the Survivor Project. Yeah, People of the Fire. I remember you coming to the Survivor Project with that. That's, okay. Yeah. So.
Folks have any other questions?
So I hope this didn't sound so disjointed. It's a little more, you know, the separation between the human beings and the people on the thing is harder. So I hope it came up okay.
Well, if there are no more questions, then we can certainly wrap up a little early. Oh, there is. Yeah, is there contact info for follow-up? Strong Oak, do you want to put your contact info into the chat? I mean, and if not, it will certainly be included in the follow-up email.
Okay, I got to put to everyone, right? And I'll put my email as well.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, let's see. I put to all, everyone. So I got to get down to that place. Oops, where it says it can go out to all. Oops, I thought I just had it. Hold on. Broadcast. Oh, there we go. Sending it.
There it is. Thank you.
Okay.
All right, and you know, if anyone has any questions, you know, after this webinar, I'm sure Strong Oak will be fine with you following up with them via email, and of course, they'll be talking more about the evaluation process during next week's webinar, and thank you so much, Strong Oak, for sharing this knowledge with us, and thank you everyone for joining us today. So. I think,
thank you, everyone.
Yeah. All right. So take care, and I think we can wrap up now. Bye.
Okay. Oh, one last thing.
Oh, yeah.
For everyone who wants to contact me, I saw a lot of stuff and you know, that people ask, and I wanted to say hello and acknowledge everything that people sent to me in the chat.
Thank you so much. All right. Take care, everyone. Bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.